Are you ready to explore the world of Azure Storage? Discover the magic of implementing storage accounts, exploring its services, and mastering the storage account kinds and replication strategies. Learn how to access and secure the storage endpoints, ensuring your data is safe and sound. Prepare to unlock the full potential of Azure Storage. Let's get started. Azure Storage offers you different storage solutions. Let's have a look at some more details into Azure Storage accounts and how we work with different storage solutions we have. Now, to begin with Azure Storage, we need to understand how we create a Azure Storage solution. First, we'll have to go into Azure and start creating a storage account. Let's get into a storage account details just in a second. Once we have a storage account ready, we have a few different options that we can explore. Azure offers 4 different types of solutions within a storage account. We can start off with Azure Containers. Typically, Azure Containers is nothing more than just a space for you to store your data type. Typically, this is where you go and create your blobs. Blobs simply stands for binary large objects. That means you can create different types of digital data in here. Data that is unstructured data type. You can look at some examples on the screen. Things like your images, your documents, could be your media files, your audio, video files that you're working with. And this is something that you can use to store all that kind of unstructured data in a blob environment. Now, please don't confuse the container, the word container here with containerized applications or any similar technology. We're referring to this as a space, a container, where you can host or place your storage data. Now, apart from Azure Containers, which we'll go into more details in a few moments, we also have a solution that looks into Azure Tables. Now, Azure Table is an ideal place to store data that is like logs. Don't confuse Azure Tables with your relational tables. You have relational databases for that. Here, we don't store relational tables. However, you can store semi-structured data type in here and structured data type that you can manage. Typically, all your logs that are kept in your Azure environment are managed and maintained in the backend on Azure Tables. You also have something called Azure Queues. Now, queues are typically very, very small in size, typically 64 KB in size. However, they have millions of instructions in them. These can be used for your applications or your microservices to have a set of workflow created behind them. So what's the next step that the service can take or an application needs to do as a process? And there can be millions of these instructions written in them. Finally, we can also use Azure Storage for Azure Files. Now, if you have used any file share solutions on premises before, then this is something very similar. But we'll explore the more details around how this looks different in the cloud and what we can do with it just in a few moments. Now, let's explore some more details around how to work in a storage account. Before we get on to creating a storage account in the portal, let's talk about some more details as offered in Azure Storage. Now, if you start looking at storage account kinds, then we have 2 different kinds of storage accounts that we can work with. First, we can have a standard account. Typically, when you're looking at a standard solution or a standard offering in the cloud for storage, then this is the most common solution that we can pick from and typically offers you all different types of storage options, like the ones we mentioned: blobs, files, queues, tables, including data lakes. Typically, data lakes is not covered in this particular course. However, if you are looking to manage large amounts of data files, like your raw data for machine learning or big data that you're managing in your environment, you will typically create this in your containers. And we can use data lakes to manage that for you. Now, if you're looking for something more specific solution to provide you much better, faster speeds and better availability, then in that case, you can look at solutions like the premium solutions in storage. However, the premium storage only offers you with 3 different options. You can have a blob option for premium, you can have file shares for premium, and you can have page blobs for premium. Now, block blobs are typically looking at data that you might want to store in larger blocks. However, you want faster access to these. Typically, this data is not designed for you to continuously edit. However, you're looking to place this data in large chunks and you might need a faster read and write from them. So this is something that you can use using premium block storage. as compared to page blobs. Typically, the page blobs are designed to do faster read and write or random read and write much quicker and gives you high performance on doing that. Now, if you look at examples of creating a solution that requires faster read and write, typically your operating systems would do that to a disk. Now, in this case, if you think of placing a resource in here, you could think of creating a virtual hard disk that is going to be used by a virtual machine, for example, to be placed in that type of solution. So you can look at placing virtual hard disk in a page blob. Now, apart from that, we have file shares that we mentioned. We'll go into details around that a bit later in the course. However, if you're looking for a high performance file share solution, you can resort into looking at a premium file share. So you have 3 premium options that are given to you. Let's discuss some more details around these as we jump onto the portal to have a look at them in a bit more detail. Now, before we do this, there are certain other options that we need to consider. One of the things would be to understand how does Azure manage the data that we're storing in the backend into the cloud to ensure the durability and availability of this data. Now, to cover this area, we need to talk about replication. Let me jump onto a whiteboard to explain some of these concepts in a bit more detail. Now, if you look at the whiteboard, I have a diagram that explains the data replication. And before I go into the details of explaining that, let's break down what you see on the screen. Now, to begin with, we have a region that's listed on the screen. So we have UK South. Now, if you have seen any of the previous videos, particularly the Module 2 video, where we speak about the core architectural components of Azure, we cover a little bit more detail around what is a region and talk a little bit more around what are availability zones within a region. Typically, if you look at the options for UK South, they have 3 different zones, which means they're completely data center redundant if there was an outage in a data center or in one of the zones in that region. Also, we mentioned there are certain other regions like UK West as an example, which is a paired region to UK South, which only has 1 zone or has just 1 data center for us to work with, just to show what's going on the screen. Now, if you look at the very first solution that we can choose for our data solutions in Azure Storage, then we can start off with LRS. LRS stands for Local Redundant Storage. Now, typically what would happen in the backend is when you start creating your storage account using LRS and you store data into it, it will create 3 different replicas or 3 copies of your data in 1 region, in 1 data center, or in 1 particular zone. Now, as an example, you can see 3 different copies of that information placed for you in 3 different columns. Now, assume these columns as separate racks or separate hardware type, completely independent from each other. So if any one of them has an issue, let's assume a disk was at fault. These are in the backend physical disks or some sort of storage type that could have electrical magnetic issue. And if they did have a failure, network failure, electrical failure, or something like that, we still have other copies that are completely independent from each other, so we can rely onto it. For an end user logging into their resource, they wouldn't see a difference. However, our engineer sitting in the backend might be running around trying to fix if there was an issue with any of the other disks or other hardware type that we had. Now, it keeps 3 copies for you in the backend, just for the availability, to make sure that your data access is available for you. Along with that, it's also very durable. So by placing your data into LRS, it ensures that you have 11 nines as durability. That simply means if you are keeping the data on a single disk, the chances of that data for a very long time residing on that disk and be corrupted at a bit or byte level or electrical level could be high. For a very long period, if you've had a disk lying around, try plug it in and see if you ever get disk error messages or something to do with data corruption. Now, durability ensures that we have that data for longer periods of time without getting corrupted. Now, keeping this in LRS, this offers me 11 nines. That simply means start typing in 99.99 and keep on doing this 11 times, and that's the durability that it offers me for keeping data in LRS, ensuring that there's less chance of this data getting corrupted as it stays on some of those resources in the backend or hardware in the backend. Now, the second option that we have over here, as compared to LRS, if you're looking for something different as a solution, and let's switch the pen to match the color, we have ZRS. Now, ZRS stands for Zone Redundant Storage. Now, hopefully this makes sense that we are looking for a region that offers a zonal solution. In this case, we can only look at a region that has 3 zones. So UK South will be a nice solution to pick from because it offers 3 zones. Now, if you're looking for a region like UK West, these regions won't offer you ZRS because they don't have multiple zones to work with. Now, just like LRS, it also creates me 3 replicas of my data. So spreading them across 3 different zones or 3 different data centers in that region, making sure that my data now is not just hardware-based redundant, it's also redundant if there was a complete outage from a data center. So it's data center redundant. So I have higher availability on that resource, and also the durability on this changes as well to 12 nines. Maybe it's worth, I write 11 nines here. And you could do the same for this. Let's do 12 nines. So 12 times 99 point, well, I shouldn't say times 99, just in case somebody starts multiplying them. So 12 nines. So if I say, just to kind of add that 12, instead of writing 12 nines here, let's say 12 and say 99.999, going all the way 12 times. So you can count 12 nines there. Now, if we keep on going further, we have similar other solutions that are listed on the screen. So let's start changing colors to match them again one more time. And the other solutions that I'm looking at are geo-redundant solutions. And this is geo-redundant storage, or GRS. Now, with the geo-redundant solution, this increases the number of replicas that we have. So it starts off with just like LRS does. Keeps 3 copies for me in my local region. So as we can see in my primary region of choice, UK South, it'll create me 3 copies here, as we did in LRS, in 3 different hardware. And then it will also give me 3 replicas to a paired region for my primary region that I've chosen. Like I mentioned before, UK South has UK West as its paired region, so I'll keep 3 copies of that same resource in the paired region as well. Now, these 3 copies, again, are kept in 3 separate hardware type. So again, just to ensure that we have higher availability if there was a need for us to rely back onto the paired region. Now, one thing that's important to understand, this is something that Azure manages for you in the backend. So you don't have to configure any of these details apart from simply choosing a replication solution that you're working with. So if you chose GRS or geo-redundant storage, in that case, Azure will manage 6 copies for you, 3 in your local region and 3 in the paired region. Typically, you won't have an access to the paired region copies that it's creating. However, if there was a need for you to gain access to them, there is a solution that you can choose while simply going into the portal while recreating them. You have to tick a small box that simply gives you an access to a variation of this, which is RAGRS, which stands for Read Access to your geo-redundant storage. Now, with doing RAGRS, or Read Access to my geo-redundant storage, I can now start looking at my secondary copies that are kept in the paired region, and I can access them just for read purposes. So that's interesting to see. Now, this could be used for various reasons. If, for instance, you're looking at solutions where you might want to push away all your read-intensive workload in your environment to the secondary region, this would be a perfect solution. Now, the read and write capability on my primary region isn't typically impacted when we have a solution created. They have their own IOPS, and in that case, it has its own read and write. However, if I know there are certain workloads that are just going to be doing read, I could decide to choose the secondary region for them and push all the read workload onto that, making it easier for the primary region for other purposes. Now, one thing that's important to understand so far when we have spoken about solutions that are on the same region, so for example, the first 2 replications we spoke about, LRS or ZRS, both situations, the data is in the same region. Typically, this data is written synchronously. As and when you hit the save button or bring the files in or bring the data in, it saves them into 3 copies at the same time. Now, even in the example of ZRS, you can see we split the data across 3 different zones. And as I've mentioned on the screen as well, that this is synchronously written into 3 different solutions, so 3 different zones at the same time. The geo solutions are slightly different. As and when the data moves from one region to another region, typically this is done in asynchronous mode. That means in geo solutions, my 3 replicas on the primary region are written first. As and when they're complete, they'll then start writing the secondary copies, 3 additional replicas into the secondary region. So these are going to be asynchronous. Now, if for any reason you are plugging in a read workload onto the secondary region, but you require an up-to-date information in real time on when things are happening and recorded into the data or into your storage account, then maybe your secondary region read might not be a best solution for that, because there might be a little bit of delay in that data to be written in the secondary region. So if it's a very, very critical workload, you might still want to keep the read into your primary region. However, if that is not an issue or a constraint, by all means, you can pull the data from the secondary region. Things like plugging your dashboards that explain what's going on in some of these, reporting from them, or someone who is just looking to read information from some of these storage solutions, then your RA/GRS will be good enough. Now, let's pick up one last solution that we have on the screen. Let's switch the colors for this to go into orange, and let's go down into talking about the last option that we have on the screen. Now, for the last option, this is a mixture of a couple of other solutions that we've already spoken about, and this is GZRS. As you can now imagine, we're looking at a geo solution. However, this is going to be spread across different zones in my primary solution. So looking at the scenario that we have in UK South, again, if I'm using a region that doesn't offer me zones, this solution won't be available. However, if I've chosen the right region, like UK South, I could use GZRS. That means it will keep 3 copies for me. So both my geo solutions altogether will keep 6 copies. Now, it will keep 3 copies for me in my primary region, but spread them across different zones, just like we did with ZRS. And finally, it will look at creating me 3 additional copies or replicas into my secondary region. Just like with the GRS solution, the 3 replicas that it's creating for me on the secondary region, these are not directly accessible for me unless I go into the portal and choose a tick box that suggests, hey, I might want to read that data too, and I can request RA/GZRS, which is read access to my zone redundant storage. Now, bear that in mind, even if you're using GZRS, the 3 copies in 3 different zones is only kept in the primary region, not in the secondary region. In the secondary region, they will always be kept just like in the same single zone, and will be kept in 3 different hardware for you in the back end. Now, in terms of your durability with the geo solutions, typically you're looking at 16 nines. So you can go into saying 99.999, and hopefully someone can work out on what that gives you in terms of the chance of you having an error on the data, and work out what are the possibilities of you doing that. Again, it gives you high durability of you keeping that data in some of the geo solutions that we have. Now let's jump back onto the slide and talk about some more details around this. Now it's time for us to go and start creating a storage account. Now, before we do this, one important thing to mention as you start your journey into creating a storage account in Azure, one of the few things that you will have to do, as we've done in previous modules talking about creating any resource, is complete some basic details. Now, out of those basic details, one of them will be to choose a subscription. Second one will be choosing a resource group. And the third one typically that we talk about is creating a name for a resource. In this scenario, keeping a name for this particular solution is very, very crucial. Now, why is this any different to keeping a name for any other resource? Now, there are certain services, including the storage, that these services would require you to create a name that's globally unique, simply because in the backend, it will use that account name that you're creating to create certain endpoints. Now, for Azure Storage, these endpoints look very similar. The only thing that makes it different is the storage account name that you use. So it wouldn't allow you to create a storage account name that's already been used by anybody else in Azure as a storage account. So that's something that you'll have to bear in mind. In this case, if I would just look at some of the examples that are on the screen, this is very important to understand on how the storage accounts look like. Typically, your storage account will always end on these few bits, things like .core.windows.net. As you can see, the same information repeated again. So we have .core.windows.net for all the examples that are here. Now, if we start looking at some more details that are on the screen, let's highlight them with a different color. So if I choose, let's assume we go by green. Now, if I am using containers and working with containers in my environment, now this is where you can start seeing that the solution will add .blob.core.windows.net. If I'm working with table solution in the storage account, then it's .tables.core.windows.net. I'm sure you can get the gist of the rest of it. So queues will be .queues, files will be .files.core.windows.net. Now, the important part here was the storage account name. This is what keeps it unique. Otherwise, for anyone who's creating a storage account, these endpoints or the last part of the URL will stay the same. The only thing that looks different for them is looking at the storage account name. So the storage account name that you create becomes part of your URL link for you to gain access to your storage. Or when you're working with different solutions, this would be the part that they would need to use. So it has to be kept unique. Now we can choose different options to change some of these details. For instance, we spoke about DNS in one of the modules during networking sessions. You can bring in your custom domain details in here as well. And you can start looking at providing it with an access name such as blob.contoso.com instead of using the blob.core.windows.net with your account name. So you could use a CNAME to help you direct your traffic into your own custom domain name. So you have some of those options. Otherwise, by default, it will be your account name .blob.core.windows.net. Now let's jump into the portal and start creating a storage account. All right, we're back onto the portal. Now, if you go into storage accounts, if you don't have storage accounts on your favorite blade, or if you don't have them in your recent used services, you can always type them in or look for new resources from the blade and jump into creating a new storage account. Now let's jump into the storage account quickly and have a look at some details in what we can do as part of creating a storage account. First thing we're going to do is we're going to start looking at creating a new storage account. Let's hide the menu blade, make some space for us to work with this. And let's zoom in a bit. Now, as I look at the storage account, we have the basic tab, and part of the basic tab, as we've done many times before, we are going to complete some details. Basic details include your subscription, choice of resource group that you're working on. Throughout the course, we'll be working on AZ-104 demo, so we'll use it as that. Now, the next part is the important part. We are creating a storage account name. This is where we are going to start defining a unique name that's not been used before. So, for example, if I jump onto typing in Contoso, and I'll wait for the system to tell me, hey, this name is already taken, but very likely with some of the demos that Microsoft does, might have taken Contoso already. Well, let's add something to it. Let's say Contoso AZ-104 demo. Now that's the name that I'm looking for. Let's see if this name has already been taken. Doesn't seem like it has, so we'll work with Contoso AZ-104 demo as the name for the storage account for this part of the session. Now the next part that we are going to choose is the region, and let's go into choosing UK South as we've done with most of our resources for the session. By all means, no particular reason, but just to work with one of the solutions, let's pick up UK South. As we started off with the example, we'll carry on working with it for this course. Again, like I said, we can choose any one of the regions that are available for us. Now, there is a small section that the portal has started doing in recent months, and this is asking you the primary purpose of you using this storage account. If you click onto the information tab over here, this is simply for you to define or kind of type in on what you are planning to do with the storage account. However, as it suggests, that this will not limit you to exclusively use this particular option that you're going to choose at this stage. That means if I go in here and say I am going to use blobs for most of my time or Azure Data Lake solutions, that doesn't mean I can't go and create other solutions. I can. But again, this is just for me to choose what my primary purpose of the storage account is going to be. Now let's go with the first solution over here and choose blobs for now. Let's assume the main purpose of us working today is to create blobs. However, we'll look at some other options within as well. Now, as I move further along, we mentioned earlier on the two different types of storage solutions that we can pick from. We can choose a standard version. This gives me options to create all different types of storage options we have, things like queues, tables, files, and containers and blobs. So we can choose any of those if we go with the standard version. However, if I'm looking for something that has better performance and low latency or lower latency, we can switch onto premium. However, before I switch onto premium, keep an eye on the screen on how it changes. As soon as I go into premium, some other options pop up on my screen. And at this point, you can see there are certain other options we can pick from. As mentioned earlier on the session, when we go into premium accounts, we can only pick from 3 different solutions as premium offering at the moment. We can go into block blobs, as we mentioned before. This is for you to store your large files into your storage account, as it says, with high transaction rates and low storage latency. Or we can look at page blobs, where you can have random read and write operations done, typically like I said, as an operating system would do on a disk. And if you're creating virtual machines and creating virtual hard disks, this could be an ideal solution for that. However, we have the file shares option over here as well, which can be a good solution for an organization that's looking to create file shares with high performance requirements. That's something that you can pick and choose from. Now, these are the only 3 offerings that we have in premium. Let's come out of it. Let's go back into standard so we can get to see other options as well as we create this solution. As we scroll down, we can see the redundancy option. So we just spoke about a few different redundancy options that we can pick from. So we have 4 different options that we can explore in this case. Now, I am seeing the zone redundancy solutions in this scenario simply because my choice of region is UK South. Now, if I switch that to, let's assume, going into UK West, which I know doesn't offer any zones or multiple zones. So if I go into this, it only gives me either a local redundant storage solution or a geo-redundant, because it doesn't have availability zones within that region for me to use. So let's switch this back. Let's go back into choosing UK South. Right, after we've gone back to the UK South as a solution, again, we can see all the 4 options that are available for us. Now, in this particular demo, I am going to carry on with local redundant storage as part of this setup. However, just to explore some of the options that we can see with geo-redundant solutions, as I mentioned, typically with geo-redundant solutions, you get 6 replicas of this data. However, the 3 replicas are in your primary zone and 3 are kept in your secondary zone, which is going to be a paired region for your primary solution. So UK South is my primary region. UK West becomes my secondary or paired region to UK South. That's where the 3 other copies or replicas are kept. However, by default, I can't access them. And like I said earlier as well, that for you to access them, all I need to do is tick this box and request access to the secondary region as well. So if I need to read data from the secondary region, I should be able to do that by simply ticking that box. Now, let's come back out of this. Let's go back into the local redundant storage for this demo, and we'll progress from here and see how we can do the rest of the details in the storage account. Now, as part of the storage creation, there are quite a few other options within these menus. We're not going to explore every single one of them for today, but just highlight some of the important ones to work with. Now, under advanced, I have some features looking for security. Currently, there are some settings that are ticked off for me already. However, we can always go back into my settings at a later stage of my storage account and switch these options around for whatever requirements that I might have. For instance, later on, we'll have a look at some options to access my storage account in containers, and we'll look at how we can enable or change the access or anonymous access to my storage in my Blob environment. We'll have a look at some of that later on. We can always come back and take this off, or we'll see how we can change these settings after the storage account is created. So I'll leave this out for now. Currently, my storage access is going to be based on my access keys. We'll talk more about what these keys are as part of the security of my account, and I'll explain and where they are and how we manage them. We can also switch this to have our account accessed by default using Entra authentication in the portal. So users will have to go and authenticate to Entra to gain access to my storage account. Again, depending on your requirements, you might want to switch that from access keys to Entra authorization. Along with that, there are quite a few other options that are here. Let's touch on some more of these just to clarify some details. Typically, when we go into my Blob storage accounts, the Blobs are not necessarily a hierarchical storage resource. You are not necessarily looking at creating folders and subfolders and files within them. It doesn't cater for that kind of solution. However, you are still able to create directory paths within them. If you're looking for a solution for your data lake and you want to create a hierarchical namespace, you should be able to come in your settings and tick that box off. Now, this would be important, so please make sure if you are planning to create a storage account that's used for that purpose, please make sure you tick that box so you can have a hierarchical structure in your Blob accounts. Apart from my Blob accounts, if I scroll further down, I can see some more details into my Blob storage. Currently, it's talking about different tiers that I have over here available for me to look at. Now, let's leave this conversation for a few moments. We'll come back into the tiers and discuss what the tiers are and how they look like and how this impacts me working with my resources and also the cost that comes along with that. But we'll jump onto that in a few moments. Let's just create the storage account first, and then we'll discuss details around the Blob storage in a few moments. With Azure Files, there is a small option down here that tells me that I can enable large file shares. Currently, this is ticked off for me already and grayed out. In the past, this used to be a minimum or a size of 5 tebibyte. You are hearing me correct. I am saying tebibyte and not terabyte. Now, if you are not aware of the difference between the two, by all means, have a look at the details around that. Typically, when you're looking at a value of terabyte, you're assuming it's 1,000 gigabyte. This is to be more precise because you're losing out on 1024, which is the exact value. So you're losing out on 24 gigabytes. As we jump up in numbers, that becomes quite a lot of space. So this is to be more precise data value calculation. So we're looking at 5 tebibytes. However, in recent months, this has changed, and the storage accounts in the past where we're creating file shares, we had to request for creating file shares of up to 100 tebibytes. Now, this is a default. So you don't have to go and request for one, but by default, you'll see your accounts are going to be offering you to create file shares of up to 100 tebibytes. So we don't need to make any changes to this. Let's go back up on the top, look at some networking options. We will come back into the security part of this module in storage and discuss some more details around networking. However, at a very, very quick overview of this, you can see that we have currently my data being accessed from any network or all networks at this point. That means if I have the storage account created, anyone in the world from anywhere on any network should be able to access this, given that they have the right details. They should be able to access my storage. Now, for generic solutions, this might be okay, but if you're looking to create secure solutions and create secure access to your storage account, this might not be the solution that you might want to choose. And we will look into choosing other options and tie this into some of the topics we've covered in our networking solutions or networking modules, discussing on how we can make this more restricted access from certain networks. So we'll come back to this, and we've spoken topics like private endpoints and service endpoints. So we'll have a look at having those conversations back again as part of securing my storage account. Now, in terms of data protection, By default, any storage solution in Azure is typically secured as encryption is embedded into it. Similarly, with my storage account, by default is encrypted at rest. So I don't necessarily need to worry about encryption to begin with. However, before I go into more details around encryption, you can see there are options for you to choose if you want to start looking at creating soft delete solutions. Now, by default, this box is ticked off. I can change my soft delete options from 7 days to any number of days that I choose. However, bearing in mind that this is something that I can imagine as a recycle bin. So if somebody has deleted the data by mistake or for a malicious action, I can always go back and recover this data from the soft delete, depending on the number of days that you define. By default, this is 7 days. Along with that, I can look at enabling tracking on my blobs. We'll look at some more details around tracking when we look into managing our blob environment on how this becomes useful. And I'll enable this feature at a later stage. Now, this can be quite nice if I want to see who last accessed a data type or when was the last time a resource got access. So this is where we can enable tracking for us to see some of that data, and we can plan some other solutions around that too, apart from monitoring and securing my solutions. Now, we'll have a look at some more details around that a bit later on. And if for any reasons you're looking for creating data that is stored in your environment that is kept for a particular duration of time, either it's a compliance requirement or there is a legislation that dictates that you must keep some data in your environment for a particular period of time, you can look into creating immutability in your storage accounts, which will ensure that the policies that you create, that data will retain for that duration of time, and you're not able to delete that data out of that duration. So it will restrict anyone from deleting that data for the duration of the policy that you create in here. So be careful of creating these in your environment, even if they are for demo. Now, let's jump back onto the encryption. As I was saying, Azure has a storage level encryption or service encryption embedded into this. So SSE is already part of it. So your data at rest and storage accounts is encrypted. Typically, Microsoft manages these keys for you. So by default, you see Microsoft managed keys are already highlighted for me. That means if I create storage account and keep data into this, this is already encrypted using solutions that we have part of my storage account, which we'll discuss a bit later in security. However, every time I access this data, it's decrypted and encrypted as I leave it, automatically without me having to do anything additional. If there was ever a need for me to change some of these settings, I can always go and choose to say, I need to bring my own keys, and this is something that I will manage, and I will encrypt my own data with my managed keys. By all means, you can. So you can choose customer managed keys and bring your own keys. However, for you to do this, we highly recommend you choosing a solution where you can manage your keys very, very safely and securely, so you don't lose access to those keys, or you don't misplace them, or they don't fall into wrong hands. So you can use solutions like Key Vault and manage your keys in that environment. Now, if you are managing your own keys and you've managed to lose them, either because there was a ransomware attack on your device and you had the keys in the device, hopefully not, but if you are doing that, or if you've managed to misplace or delete the keys and you ask Microsoft to help you with accessing your storage, then unfortunately in that event we won't be able to make any changes to it, simply because you are using an encryption key to encrypt that data or that storage type, and we won't be able to break that encryption for you to get into it. So please make sure if you're using your own encryption keys, you manage them well and keep them in a secure place. Again, this is something that you can look into more details around. If you're looking to manage your own keys, there are options to look into implementing your Key Vault and linking that to your storage account on how you would like to access them. For now, we'll leave it into Microsoft Management Keys for us for this demo, and we'll move on from here to look at creating the storage account. Now we are to the end of the creation. Let's tag this resource one more time. Let's put this onto departments. This time, let's drop this for my HR department. I'm creating a storage account for my HR to create different files or whatever that they need to do with this. So let's start creating this account. Let's go back and see if Azure will validate all my options that we've chosen. You can go through reviewing the information on the screen to make sure you've chosen the right details. And once you're happy with all the details, you can hit create and let the storage account be created for you in the Azure environment. Okay, my storage account is now ready. Let's go into it and have a look at some details from here. Now, at a quick glance, I am in my storage account menu at the moment. So you can see that right at the top of the screen. So I'm in the storage account. This is my storage account blade. And currently I'm in the overview tab to look at some details. We can see all the settings that we configured while we were creating the storage account listed on the screen. So we can pick up any information to understand exactly what we created or what's been defined as the point of storage account creation. Now, along with that, if I scroll down on the side of the screen on the blade, I can see that I have quite a few different options to look at, which we'll cover in more detail shortly. But for now, I can see I have different data storage solutions within this. I can go into creating containers, file shares, queues, and tables, because this is the standard account. With the premium accounts, we won't have some of these options. And we'll go back into configuring security in the next part of the session. Now, just before we stop this part of the session, one thing that's interesting to see, if I go into my endpoint to verify the information that we were covering just before the demo, we mentioned that every storage account will have an endpoint that looks very similar. So let's quickly highlight some of that information right on the screen. So if I scroll down here, you can now see that all my storage accounts typically end with core.windows.net, like we mentioned before. So I'll highlight 3 of them that are visible currently for us on the screen. However, if you look carefully, I have my storage type in here. So we have, I'm canceling you out. So we have Blob over here. We have the file solution over here, and we have the queue solution over here. Obviously, if I scroll further down on the screen, we have the tables there as well. As you can already see, parts of the table visible there. Now, if I go into showing the first part of this link, this is the storage account name that we created. So that is Contoso AZ-104 demo, one word, has my storage account, which is again seen again and again for all my endpoints for this storage account. Now, I'm hoping this gives you a quick understanding on how to create the storage account, some of the details that go within as part of the replication, location, and other solution or other options that we can choose. Now, before we explore any further details going into security or securing my storage account, which we'll look into the next session. So this brings us to the end of this part of the session.